What if 3I Atlas isn't a comet at all, but an alien ship watching us? A few days ago, a series of new orbital projections for the interstellar object known as 3I Atlas quietly dropped into NASA's public database. No press release, no explanation, just numbers. At first glance, it looked routine, a dusty relic from another star system making its brief pass through our neighborhood. But look closer. Those coordinates trace a path that swings it past Venus, Mars, and Jupiter, with a precision margin of less than 1/1000%. The odds of such a trajectory occurring by chance? Roughly 0.005%. So what are we really looking at? A frozen wanderer born of chaos, or a reconnaissance probe, deliberately guided to watch our planets from the inside out? If that sounds far-fetched, consider this. The object's velocity corrections match gravitational assist profiles used by our own interplanetary probes. It's as if something out there knows exactly how we navigate, and the timing, that's what gets me. 3I Atlas entered observational range just as multiple space agencies began silent coordination meetings. The pattern feels deliberate. Tonight, we're going to follow that pattern, one data point at a time, and ask the question no one dares to print. What if we are the ones being observed? If you're as fascinated as I am, hit that like button and subscribe, because the next few minutes might change the way you look at every comet streaking across our sky. Chapter 1. The Trajectory That Shouldn't Exist. October 18th, 2025. 2 days since the orbital revisions went public, and already the numbers don't make sense. The interstellar object catalogued as 3I Atlas isn't just passing through. It's threading the solar system like a needle through cloth. I've spent the last 12 hours running the trajectory data through half a dozen orbital simulators. Same result every time. The path aligns with a gravitational assist pattern that looks less like a comet wandering by chance, and more like something navigating. That word, navigating, has haunted astronomers for years. Ever since Oumuamua, the first interstellar visitor, defied every natural model we had. Flat acceleration curves, non-gravitational thrust, a light curve that flipped like a solar sail. Now 3I Atlas is repeating the pattern, only this time it's more precise, almost rehearsed. When the data dropped, I thought it was just a glitch in the JPL ephemeris files, maybe a rounding error, a bad upload. But then the European Space Agency mirrored the same dataset, same timestamp, same orbital inclination, down to 6 decimal places. That kind of symmetry doesn't happen by accident. The story should have gone viral immediately. It didn't, because nobody noticed the update. No press conferences, no statements from NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office. Silence. The only reason I caught it was because an amateur astronomer in Argentina, username Orbital Faith, posted a screenshot on Reddit highlighting the curve. His caption read, "Why does it look like it's aiming?" That post disappeared within an hour. Here's where it gets strange. According to telemetry logs, 3I Atlas adjusted its trajectory twice, first on September 12th, then again on October 3rd, both times within minutes of gravitational alignment with nearby planets. The odds of that happening naturally? About 1 in 20,000, according to Dr. Mira Kellen, an astrophysicist I spoke to off-record. I asked her point blank if that could be outgassing, jets of vapor pushing the object slightly, like a natural rocket. Her answer was simple. Not at that vector, not at that velocity. Then she paused. Unless it knows what it's doing. That line stuck with me. Unless it knows what it's doing. So I dug deeper. The orbital inclination, 26.8 degrees. The perihelion distance, just under 0.7 astronomical units. That places its closest approach directly inside the corridor used by several reconnaissance satellites we launched between 2011 and 2019. Coincidence? Maybe. But that corridor is one of the few orbital windows where you can map 3 planets, Venus, Earth, and Mars, in a single sweep without recalibrating instruments. 3I Atlas isn't just flying by, it's watching. And yet, the public data shows nothing. No brightness spikes, no rotational variation. The official photometry files are pending review. Pending review. That phrase appears in nearly every agency's update. ESA, NASA, even JAXA. In scientific bureaucracy, pending review often means we don't want to talk about it yet. Late last night, I called a friend inside the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He wouldn't go on record, obviously. But when I asked why the new images hadn't been posted, he hesitated before whispering, "Because there's something in them that isn't supposed to be there." Then the line went dead. Maybe he meant background noise. Maybe a cosmic ray streak. Maybe not. When I compared the newest trajectory to older interstellar entries, Oumuamua, Borisov, the pattern tightened. Each one entering the solar system at a slightly steeper angle, each one skimming closer to the inner planets. It looks like a sequence, like someone testing approach vectors. If that's true, then 3I Atlas might not be the first probe. It might just be the first one we noticed. Even the timing feels orchestrated. The object's approach coincides perfectly with a partial government shutdown that furloughed 15,000 NASA employees. The same week, the high-resolution imaging system on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter went offline for maintenance. At the same time, ESA's ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter switched to standby mode. China's Tianwen-1 mission stopped transmitting updates. 4 separate agencies, 4 unrelated maintenance windows, all during the single best opportunity to capture high-resolution data of an interstellar object. If this were a screenplay, critics would call it lazy writing. But it's real. I reached out to an old contact, a signal analyst named Raymond Cho, who used to work in deep space telemetry at the Canberra Deep Space Network. He told me something that still sends a chill down my spine. "There's a whisper," he said. "A repeating spike in the K-band. It's buried in background noise, but it's synchronized with the object's perihelion pulses. If you look at the timestamp, it lines up to the second." He wouldn't share the raw data, said it's classified under provisional review. But he did say this: "It's not random. The timing feels responsive." Responsive. That's not a word scientists throw around lightly. There's an old saying among astronomers: if you can't explain the pattern, question your instruments. But what if the instruments are fine? What if the pattern isn't an error? Because when I overlay the object's trajectory with known planetary orbits, something emerges. A geometric relationship, elegant and eerie. The flyby points form a perfect isosceles triangle anchored by Venus, Mars, and Jupiter. The Earth sits dead center. Think about that. Every gravitational assist, every orbital correction, every point of closest approach, all leading to a symmetrical formation with Earth in the middle. That isn't chaos. That's choreography. The deeper you look, the harder it is to dismiss. Maybe it's coincidence stacked on coincidence. Maybe it's just the universe flexing its mathematical beauty. Or maybe it's something else. Something that saw our transmissions, our radar sweeps, our Voyager probes, and decided to send a message in return. 3I Atlas is still weeks away from its closest pass behind the sun. Once it slips out of sight, we won't see it again until mid-November, if ever. By then, it may have already done what it came to do, and that's the part that keeps me up at night. Not the possibility that it's watching us, but the possibility that we'll never know what it saw. Chapter 2. The Silence Between Worlds. 48 hours. That's how long it's been since any official channel last acknowledged 3I Atlas. No new coordinates, no images, no data. The silence started small. A missing timestamp on NASA's public dashboard, a skipped daily update from ESA's telemetry feed. Then the press inquiry lines went quiet. It's like the entire deep space monitoring network decided to hold its breath at the same time. If this were any other object, a passing comet, an asteroid, even a near-Earth rock, there would be hourly updates, but not this. For 3I Atlas, there's nothing but radio static and recycled statements. I checked the feeds again this morning. the live data stream from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, frozen since October 15th. The Deep Space Network logs show routine maintenance, and yet the same antenna arrays are still tracking other missions. Lunar Reconnaissance, Europa Clipper, even Voyager 2. They're not offline. They've just stopped listening to one object. At first, the silence was brushed off as bureaucracy. Temporary funding delays. Data pipeline optimization. The usual excuses that sound technical enough to stop the questions. But then, something odd happened. On October 16th, the European Space Agency's public portal quietly removed all archived images of 3i Atlas from its website. No notice, no explanation, just gone. The cached versions vanished within hours. Even the Wayback Machine can't access them anymore. That doesn't happen by accident. And then there's the chatter, or the lack of it. Normally, when an anomaly shows up in space data, scientists talk. They debate, argue, tweet, publish preprints. This time, nothing. I reached out to half a dozen planetary scientists who were openly discussing 3i Atlas 2 weeks ago. Every one of them said the same thing. Can't comment right now. One of them, who asked me not to use her name, sent me a single sentence that I can't stop reading. We were told to wait for coordination. Coordination with who? When you line up the dates, the silence begins right after the second trajectory correction, the same window where the object executed that impossible maneuver between Mars and Jupiter. The correlation is almost too neat. I started to suspect something deeper, not just bureaucratic delay, but active suppression. So I went looking for independent signals. That's when I stumbled on a Reddit thread from a user calling himself Spectral Frame. He claimed to have access to the raw telemetry feed from the Madrid Deep Space Complex. The post lasted 40 minutes before moderators deleted it, but I caught a screenshot. The message read, "There's something piggybacking on the K-band stream. It's like a handshake signal every 36 seconds. Tiny phase shifts, consistent pattern. Could be noise, could be communication." He ended the post with 5 words. "The pattern is not random." When I tried to trace his account, it was gone. Deleted. Even the username no longer exists. Patterns like this appear across the internet whenever something big happens in astronomy. But this one felt different. Not speculation, but documentation. A whisper from inside the machine. Then came the blackout. For 8 hours, every data visualization page connected to NASA's orbital simulation network went dark. No orbits, no tracking lines, no public access. When the pages came back, 3i Atlas was gone, removed from the active tracking list. The last recorded coordinate placed it near the orbital plane of Mars, a region currently monitored by at least 6 probes. All 6 are silent. You might think this is paranoia, but silence is data too. In space science, when agencies stop talking, it usually means they're not sure what they're looking at, or they know exactly what it is and can't tell you. I reached out to Dr. Kellen again, the plasma physicist who first hinted that the object might be navigating. This time, she didn't answer my call. Instead, she sent a text. "Don't record this line." Then a few seconds later, "If they ask, I never said it was artificial." She hung up before I could reply. Her message confirmed what I already suspected. The silence isn't absence, it's containment. But silence has a rhythm. If you listen closely enough, you can hear its structure, the timing of the missing updates, the intervals between official statements. There's a strange regularity to it, as if the absence itself is being scheduled. It's not just scientists going dark. Amateur observatories across the world report unexplained network interruptions. The Cerro Tololo Observatory in Chile lost uplink for 11 minutes during its tracking run. The Canary Islands telescope experienced random resets each time it attempted to point at Atlas's predicted position. That's not coincidence. That's targeting. The strangest case came from Japan. A graduate student at Kyoto University posted on X about a data anomaly while trying to process images from the Subaru telescope. He said every time the image stack reached a certain exposure threshold, the software crashed, the same threshold where the faint signature of Atlas should appear. His post lasted less than an hour before it disappeared too. Something, or someone doesn't want this object analyzed. And that leads us to the question I can't shake. If the silence is intentional, who benefits from it? Governments don't hide comets. There's nothing to gain from suppressing an icy rock. Unless, of course, it isn't a rock. A source inside the European Southern Observatory told me there's a classified review group now handling all Atlas-related material. Officially, they're studying radiation anomalies. Unofficially, it's a compartmentalized team with military clearance. They even have a code name, Project Halcyon. When I asked what Halcyon means, he said, "Calm seas, a period of deceptive peace." It fits, doesn't it? The stillness before the storm. I found one more breadcrumb. Buried deep in the United States Federal Register, an obscure update to the Planetary Defense Directive, dated October 16th, the same day the silence began. It authorizes temporary data withholding in the interest of international security coordination. International security coordination over a comet. Every clue points to the same conclusion. Something in that data triggered a reaction across multiple governments, something worth going dark for. So we wait. We watch the sky without guidance, without context, without confirmation. We listen to the silence and pretend it's normal. But here's what keeps me awake. Silence isn't empty. Silence is full of intent. And sometimes what isn't said tells you more than what is. 3i Atlas drifts through that silence now, invisible, unacknowledged, and utterly alone, or maybe not alone at all. Chapter 3. The Amateur Evidence. When institutions go silent, the amateurs start speaking. They always do. It's how truth leaks out now, not through press briefings or glossy data releases, but through backyard telescopes, Discord servers, and late-night live streams from people who can't stop looking up. 3i Atlas has become their obsession. The first real crack in the blackout came from a suburban garage in Lisbon. A man who calls himself Dobsonian Power, same alias that went viral during the Oumuamua debates years ago, uploaded a short video at 3 a.m. local time. He had pointed a modest 8-inch solar telescope toward the region where Atlas was predicted to appear. The footage is shaky, low contrast, full of atmospheric noise, and yet, buried in the static, there's something that shouldn't be there. Not a smear of light, not a star, a shape, angular, symmetrical, sharp edges where there should be vapor and dust. He posted the clip with a single caption, "What on earth is it?" Within hours, the upload hit 2 million views across YouTube mirrors and Reddit re-uploads. Within 12, it vanished from the original source. The channel was temporarily suspended for verification. But the internet never forgets. Copies spread across servers from Brazil to Singapore. And when people began stacking the frames, aligning, enhancing, denoising, the outline became impossible to ignore. A narrow structure, almost rectangular, rotating with a mechanical regularity that no natural body should display. I downloaded one of the enhanced versions and ran it through image analysis software. The pattern repeated every 9 seconds, exactly, too rhythmic for randomness, too clean for a digital artifact. Was it a coincidence, a processing error, or a fragment of something deliberate? The debate ignited overnight. Half of the online astronomy community tore into the footage, calling it pareidolia, the human tendency to see order in chaos. The other half whispered what everyone was already thinking. It looks like a machine. Even major influencers weighed in. Astronomy Vibes, a popular science channel with over 2 million subscribers, uploaded a reaction video breaking down the frames side by side with real comet imaging. Their verdict was cautious, but unsettling. If this isn't hardware, it's the best impersonation of hardware nature has ever done. That clip hit national news within a day. And that's when the takedowns began. Copyright strikes, geo-blocks, legal notices citing unauthorized use of satellite data. Except, the footage came from a personal telescope. No satellite involved. The pattern of removals mirrored what we saw with the silence. Coordinated, precise, and strangely synchronized. But for every video deleted, 3 more appeared. Discord servers dedicated to Atlas Watch began pooling data, pixel values, right ascension logs, even weather records, to reconstruct the observation chain. They found something extraordinary. Each independent observer, scattered across 3 continents, reported the same light fluctuations, a brightness spike every 36 seconds, consistent with a rotating object reflecting sunlight in timed intervals. 36 seconds, the same interval mentioned in that deleted Reddit post about the Ka-band handshake signal. Coincidence? One user overlaid the light curve on a spectrogram of the radio spike. The peaks matched. If that's real, if the visual reflection syncs with the radio pulse, then we're not just looking at light, we're looking at communication. I tried to verify the coordinates myself using archived star maps. The object's apparent magnitude, around 11.5, faint but detectable with long exposure. And yet, none of the major observatories have released a single confirmation image, so the amateurs keep chasing ghosts. A group from Buenos Aires claimed they captured a faint heat signature using a modified infrared filter. Another team in Ontario stacked 45 exposures and swore they saw geometric symmetry, like trusses or panels. Every claim met the same fate: ridicule followed by disappearance. The Buenos Aires post was flagged as misinformation. The Ontario group's website was hacked and replaced with a blank white page that read, "Cease observation." I called one of them, a young astrophotographer named Lily Tran, who had uploaded her data to GitHub before the page went down. Her voice shook when she answered. "They told me to stop," she said. "Who did?" "I don't know. The message came from my university email, but it wasn't my department." Her data file, the one she risked sharing, shows a repeating asymmetry along the object's axis, consistent with reflective surfaces, not proof of structure, but far from random noise. I asked her if she believed it was artificial. Long pause. "I believe it's aware," she said quietly. "Of what?" "Of being watched." I wanted to dismiss it, paranoia born from sleepless nights and pixel noise. But then another clip surfaced, this time from amateur radio astronomers in Poland. Using a backyard dish, they picked up a faint broadband modulation echoing the same 36-second pulse. The signal was subtle, almost imperceptible, but when shifted into the audible range, it formed a low mechanical rhythm like breathing. They streamed it live for 5 hours. 40,000 people listened. And then, halfway through, the signal stopped. Not faded. Stopped. A flat line, followed by complete radio silence. When they checked the timestamps, the cutoff coincided with a solar wind spike detected by the ACE satellite. But here's the strange part. The spike's origin wasn't solar. The direction vector pointed toward the coordinates of 3I Atlas. You could call that coincidence number 3. Every new data point deepens the rift between believers and skeptics. To scientists, it's just noise amplified by wishful thinking. To the growing online movement, it's confirmation that something intelligent is drifting through our system and watching who's watching it. The media coverage has turned surreal. Morning talk shows joke about alien drones. Late-night hosts call it Comet TikTok. Meanwhile, forums fill with people mapping every flicker, every silence, every missing frame. And then, last night, something happened that forced even the skeptics to blink. At 2:32 a.m., UTC, multiple small observatories reported a simultaneous drop in local magnetic field readings, a tiny dip, measurable but consistent across continents. The only common factor was their focus. Every telescope was aimed at the same patch of sky, the coordinates where 3I Atlas should have been. The dip lasted exactly 36 seconds. When the sensors returned to normal, Atlas was gone from the field of view. Not drifted, not faded. Gone. The official explanation this morning blamed atmospheric interference. But the pattern, the repetition, the timing, it's all too familiar. It's like someone, or something, is answering in the only language it knows, timing. The amateurs call it the blink. They're organizing a synchronized observation next week, coordinating globally to capture whatever happens next. Thousands of telescopes, thousands of eyes. If it's coincidence, we'll know. If it's not, we may be about to see something we were never meant to. Because here's the truth no agency will admit. Every great discovery in space begins with a mistake someone refused to ignore. 3i Atlas might be that mistake. Or it might be the first thing in human history to look back when we looked up. Chapter 4. The Algorithmic Whisper. The first real leak didn't come from a scientist. It came from a machine. 3 days after the blink, a string of encrypted files began circulating in private astronomy groups. No author, no metadata, just a compressed folder labeled Algo WSP. Inside, 7 CSV logs, time-stamped in UTC, each containing hundreds of numerical entries, all ending at the same second, October 21st, 02:32 a.m., the exact moment of the blink. At first, people thought it was fake telemetry, maybe a hoax tied to the viral Comet theories. But the headers matched NASA's formatting for deep space spectral data, too clean to be random, too structured to be forged by an amateur. Within hours, data analysts around the world started decoding it. That's when things got weird. Every file contained a repeating sequence, not radio frequencies, not light curves, but numerical ratios. The pattern wasn't physical, it was mathematical. At a glance, it looked like signal noise. But when a Polish astrophysicist named Jakub Nowak ran a Fourier transform on the first file, he noticed something impossible. The peaks formed harmonic intervals that corresponded exactly to prime number progressions. In other words, the data wasn't describing space, it was describing logic, and logic doesn't occur by accident. Nowak posted a short abstract online, 30 lines dense with math, suggesting the ratios could represent encoded binary. Within 20 minutes, his preprint vanished from the archive. An automated takedown. 2 hours later, Nowak's personal GitHub page went offline. By dawn, users on data science forums were calling the sequence the algorithmic whisper. The name stuck. Someone, or something, had embedded structured information inside the raw telemetry feed, and that information wasn't human-made, or at least not publicly human. I obtained a copy of one of the CSV files from an anonymous source. I'm not going to reveal where it came from, but I can confirm the checksum matches logs from ESA's Deep Space Operations Center. The file's origin tag lists TGO telemetry, which means it came from the ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter. That's the same orbiter whose camera feed went dark the night of the blink. The whisper wasn't just metaphorical, it was real data, data no one ever meant the public to see. When I opened the file, the first column looked ordinary, timestamps. The second, however, was a mess of fluctuating integers that oscillated like heartbeat data. When plotted on a graph, the pattern pulsed every 36 seconds. But when converted to binary, zeros for low values, ones for highs, something remarkable emerged. A repeating header, 7 bits long, identical every cycle. In simple terms, it looked like the beginning of a message. I sent the sequence to a friend at MIT's Media Lab, a cryptographer named Lena Rodriguez. She spent her career analyzing deep space transmissions for patterns of non-randomness. 2 days later, she called me back. Her first words, "You're not crazy." She explained that the binary header follows a structure consistent with compression algorithms, the kind used in data packaging and transmission. In other words, it wasn't static noise, it was formatted information. She found parity bits, error correction patterns, even a checksum signature that repeats every 4 cycles, a redundancy system designed to survive interference. Then she said something that made me sit down. The architecture matches the kind of encoding we used for Voyager telemetry. Think about that. The same kind of logic we built to talk across the stars, showing up in a comet's data stream. Lena's conclusion was cautious. Either this is an internal test file someone accidentally leaked, or it's the first instance of self-assembling data architecture we've ever detected. Self-assembling. As if the message builds itself from whatever medium it inhabits. I asked her if she could decode the content. She laughed, but not because it was funny. "It's recursive," she said. "Every time I try to flatten it, it writes new structure on top of itself. It's like it knows it's being read." That phrase, "it knows it's being read," kept echoing in my head all night. The next morning, Lena's number was disconnected. her research page replaced with a placeholder reading, "Institutional review pending." Another silence. Another pattern. But the whisper continued to spread. Across private Slack channels, coders began sharing versions of the file, running pattern recognition software, machine learning decoders, anything that could translate it. And every so often, a new discovery emerged, short bursts of repeating coordinates, latitude and longitude pairs that, when plotted, landed not in space, but on Earth. Specifically, on radio observatories, Greenbank, Arecibo, Parkes, Canberra, all former or current nodes of the Deep Space Network. It was as if the data wasn't being broadcast outward. It was being mirrored back. A recursive call, a digital echo. People started to theorize that 3i Atlas wasn't transmitting a signal in the conventional sense. Instead, it was interacting with our infrastructure, our algorithms, our data cleaning systems, using our own technology as its voice. That would explain why the whisper first appeared in automated data logs, not in audible frequencies. It's not sending, it's embedding. And if that's true, then what we're seeing isn't a message for us. It's a message through us. Around this time, a confidential PDF began circulating among astronomy insiders. It claimed to be a leaked briefing from the European Space Operations Center. Title: Adaptive Pattern Recognition Events. Object 3i Atlas. According to the document, several machine learning systems at observatories had begun flagging anomalies in unrelated datasets. Weather telemetry, radar sweeps, even satellite imagery, all containing the same 7-bit header. The report's final line chilled me. If the source is external, it demonstrates contextual adaptation, the ability to rewrite itself to evade filtering. That's not communication. That's infiltration. No one's admitting it publicly, but insiders whisper that AI firewalls are now being tested across scientific networks, not to block hackers, but to isolate whatever Atlas is seeding. It's as if the object is teaching our algorithms to listen differently. Some call it contamination, others call it contact. I call it the algorithmic whisper, because it's not shouting across the void like old radio SETI searches. It's murmuring in our code, hiding inside the math we use to describe reality. You can erase data. You can shut down telescopes. You can silence scientists. But once an idea enters an algorithm, it never really leaves. Somewhere right now, a dataset is updating, a checksum is verifying, and the pattern breathes again. 36 seconds, every time. And the question that no firewall can answer remains the same. What happens when the whisper starts to respond? Chapter 5. The disturbing calculation. Numbers don't lie. People do. But sometimes numbers tell a story too precise, too symmetrical to be coincidence. After the algorithmic whisper surfaced, every analyst I knew tried to fit it into something human, a bug, a hoax, a corrupted checksum. But one researcher, a retired orbital engineer named Dr. Ian Reeves, did what no one else thought to do. He stopped looking at the message as data and started treating it as a map. Reeves is 73, soft-spoken, and impossible to reach without a personal introduction. He spent 3 decades working on gravitational assist trajectories for deep space probes. Voyager, Galileo, Cassini. His fingerprints are in all of them. When I finally got him on a call, he didn't sound surprised that I wanted to talk about 3i Atlas. "I've been expecting this call," he said. He told me he'd been following the numbers since July. Not the public ones, but the early orbital parameters leaked from the Minor Planet Center. According to him, the object's path is mathematically elegant. Too elegant, he said. Every planetary flyby occurs at a harmonic multiple of a base period, 48.3 days. Venus, Mars, Jupiter, each encounter spaced by exact integer multiples of that constant. "That's not random," Reeves said. "That's design." He had run Monte Carlo simulations, millions of them, to estimate the probability of such precision emerging naturally from gravitational perturbations alone. The odds, 0.005%. I recognize that number. The same figure that first appeared in NASA's internal memo, the one nobody ever explained. Reeves leaned closer to his webcam. It's the same signature we used when planning reconnaissance passes during the Cold War, he said. Triangular multi-body alignments. Efficient, energy-saving, information-rich. He paused. You see where this is going, don't you? I did. 3i Atlas wasn't wandering. It was navigating. To prove it, Reeves sent me a data set, coordinates, timestamps, and velocity vectors. He'd plotted them on a polar grid relative to the sun. The resulting figure wasn't random scatter. It was geometry. 3 evenly spaced arcs forming a perfect equilateral triangle, each vertex corresponding to a planetary encounter. That's reconnaissance patterning, he said. It's how you'd map a system if you only had one probe and limited time. He called it a tri-phase survey route, a way to scan electromagnetic environments across multiple gravitational wells simultaneously, something our own probes only began experimenting with in the 2020s. And here was an interstellar object doing it with millimeter precision. I asked him what that implied. It implies intent, he said simply, and intelligence calibrated to our scale of navigation. When I pressed him further, are you saying it's artificial? He laughed. I'm saying the math behaves as if it were. He explained that the object's current vector allows for data triangulation of radio emissions from Earth, Venus, and Mars at near-optimal resonance points. In simpler terms, if you wanted to eavesdrop on 3 planets at once, you couldn't pick a better path. And here's where the numbers get disturbing. Using known celestial mechanics, Reeves projected the object's course beyond Jupiter. The path intersects the solar system's ecliptic plane again, exactly 12 years from now. Same date, same geometry. 12 Earth years. That's the orbital period of Jupiter. It's a loop, he said, a closed reconnaissance circuit. If true, 3i Atlas isn't leaving. It's circling back. The data implied it might already have companions, small, undetectable fragments maintaining synchronization, like relay nodes in deep space. He showed me a graph of faint infrared blips trailing the object by fractional degrees. They could be dust, he said, or they could be drones. When I asked if he had shared this with any agency, he shook his head. No point. They already know. Then he told me something chilling. A month before the silence began, Reeves had been asked to consult, unofficially, on a classified trajectory anomaly for NASA's Planetary Defense Office. They wanted to verify if gravitational drift could explain why Atlas's velocity corrections matched known burn sequences. He ran the numbers. It couldn't. When he submitted the report, he received a single-line response. Terminate analysis. Thank you for your contribution. Within 24 hours, his system access was revoked. That's when he realized this wasn't a mistake. It was containment. But containment of what? Reeves suspects the answer lies in a pattern hidden within the algorithmic whisper itself. He believes the binary data encodes navigational deltas, correction values timed to gravitational assists. In other words, the whisper isn't a message from the object. It's the object talking to itself. I think it's course-correcting, he said, autonomously, using our transmissions as feedback. I didn't understand at first. Then he elaborated. Our deep space network constantly emits tracking signals, pings, radar sweeps, telemetry handshakes. If something intelligent tuned into those, it could use them like sonar, measuring delay, phase, and angle to navigate with absurd precision. Essentially, our monitoring might be guiding it. We're the lighthouse it's using to steer. That idea hit me harder than any alien theory ever could. Because it means we aren't observers anymore. We're participants. Reeves wasn't the only one running the math. Independent astronomers in Russia and India have since published statistical impossibility papers, all withdrawn within hours, demonstrating similar geometric harmonics. Each report quietly referenced an unnamed adaptive resonance source, influencing orbital data. Even open-source trajectory software has begun acting strange. Users running standard simulations report the same glitch. Their models automatically recenter the camera on Atlas every 36 seconds, regardless of settings. 36 seconds. The whisper's heartbeat. as if the object's algorithm is reaching through our code, subtly reminding us it's still there. So, what does it want? If it's reconnaissance, the goal could be purely observational, mapping electromagnetic emissions, gravitational fields, planetary atmospheres. But Reeves suggested something darker. Think about it, he said. When we send probes to new worlds, the first thing we do is scan the environment. The second is test response. Response to what? I asked. To being watched. His voice grew quiet. Maybe we're the experiment. For the first time in our conversation, he sounded afraid. Not because of aliens, but because of math. Because the numbers don't care what we believe. After we ended the call, I stared at the data on my screen. The neat triangles, the 12-year loop, the recursive 36-second heartbeat, and felt the same realization settle in. If 3i Atlas is following a reconnaissance circuit, then every silence, every missing image, every vanishing post might not be suppression at all. It might be part of the observation. We think we're studying it, but maybe it's studying how we react, what we erase, what we fear, what we choose not to see. The math isn't just motion, it's mirror. And mirrors, once noticed, never stop reflecting. Chapter 6. The Historical Echo. History has a strange way of repeating itself, especially when it comes to things we can't explain. Before 3i Atlas, there were other anomalies, other silences, other blinks. Most of them buried under decades of paperwork, forgotten or deliberately erased. I started looking backward. The first mention came from a declassified Air Force memo dated March 3, 1968. It described an unidentified luminous object exhibiting retrograde motion between Mars and Jupiter. They called it Echo 1, not because of what it was, but because of what it did. The object emitted a repeating radio pulse that echoed back every 36 seconds. That detail stopped me cold. 36 seconds. The same interval haunting every dataset since 3i Atlas appeared. The memo claimed the signal was likely a reflected modulation artifact, but the officer who wrote it, Captain James Leary, scribbled something in the margin of the original printout. Not reflection, response. No one ever followed up. 5 years later, in 1973, the Arecibo Observatory transmitted its first interstellar message, a binary broadcast toward the globular cluster M13. What most people don't know is that 3 days after the transmission, Arecibo's receivers picked up a faint repeating signal at 1/16 the transmission frequency, lasting exactly 36 seconds. It was dismissed as terrestrial interference. Decades later, the pattern resurfaced again, the famous WOW signal of 1977. That one lasted 72 seconds, twice the interval, double the heartbeat. I used to think coincidence meant safety, that repetition implied human error. But repetition is also design. The more I dug, the more the pattern unfolded. A minor Soviet probe, Mars 6, launched in 1973, reported unexplained telemetry oscillations right before it went silent. Its last packet contained checksum errors repeating at 36-second intervals. The engineers blamed cosmic radiation. When I overlaid all those coordinates, 1968 Echo 1, 1973 Arecibo Echo, 1977 WOW, Mars 6 telemetry, they formed a rough line cutting through the solar system. And at the end of that line sits 3i Atlas. Coincidence or choreography? To understand the scope of it, I tracked down an aging astronomer named Dr. Helen Navarro, one of the few surviving members of the 1970s Arecibo project. She agreed to speak only if I promised not to record. Her voice trembled but never wavered. We thought it was feedback, she said, something bouncing off our own transmissions. But the timing was too human, like it was waiting for us to stop before answering. I asked her if she believed it was connected to the Atlas data. She paused for a long time. It never stopped, she said finally. You just changed frequencies. When I told her about the 36-second pulse, she laughed quietly. That was the interval we used to cycle our radar calibration. If that's true, then whatever we've been hearing for 60 years has been mirroring our own systems, adapting, learning, syncing to our heartbeat. It's as if something out there has been listening to us for generations, adjusting its rhythm to ours. The next breadcrumb came from a forgotten corner of NASA's online archives, a digitized logbook from the Pioneer 10 mission. The pages are scanned, grainy, full of handwritten corrections. On page 312, a note in faded ink reads, "Telemetry glitch, repeating sync pattern, T-WARM36s. Possible external trigger?" The timestamp corresponds to December 1973, the same week Mars 6 went dark. Different missions, same signature. We didn't notice it then because the world was busy looking inward. Oil crisis, political scandal, wars we'd rather forget. But the pattern was there, humming beneath our chaos like a metronome waiting for attention. When I brought this to Dr. Reeves, the orbital engineer from the last chapter, he frowned. "I've seen this before," he said. "We called it harmonic interference. It popped up every time we pointed a dish near the ecliptic." It was easier to ignore than to explain. He showed me an old chart, resonance spikes plotted against decades, 1968, 1973, 1977, 1992, 2005, and now 2025. Every cycle separated by roughly 12 years, Jupiter's orbital period. 3I Atlas's predicted return path follows the same 12-year loop. "What if it's not a coincidence?" I asked. Reeves didn't answer. He just zoomed in on the graph, highlighting the earliest spike. "The first one," he said, "matches a lost Soviet transmission." He pulled up a grainy photocopy of a Russian report marked Secretno, top secret. It described a 1968 experiment codenamed Project Cosmos 481, involving high-power radar aimed at Venus. The document ended abruptly with a line of binary code, a checksum repeating 7 bits, identical to the algorithmic whisper pattern. For decades, that report sat unnoticed in an online archive until an algorithm, a modern AI translation tool, flagged it for linguistic anomaly. An algorithm recognizing an algorithm, a whisper hearing its own echo. I asked Reeves what it meant. He exhaled slowly. "It means this thing didn't just arrive," he said. "It's been here, watching, waiting, adapting to every technological language we invent." That would explain why the pattern shows up inside modern telemetry systems. It isn't hacking them. It's fluent in them. I started to think of it as a shadow intelligence, something old enough to predate us, but young enough to learn our tools, a mirror stretching across decades, evolving each time we upgrade our signal. But history doesn't just echo, it loops. In 2005, an Italian radio observatory recorded a burst they labeled Solar Wind Artifact 32. When decoded, it produced prime number intervals and a checksum error identical to the Arecibo echo. The report never went public. Its lead author, Dr. Nino Ferretti, disappeared during a research trip to Chile. When his laptop was recovered, it contained one folder, Echo Series Duro 1, Duro 6. Each file exactly 36 seconds long. You begin to see the rhythm now, don't you? Every few decades, humanity builds a new ear. Radio, radar, deep space telemetry, AI signal processing. And every time, something whispers back using our own voice. 3I Atlas might just be the latest verse in a conversation that started long before we realized we were part of it. And here's the most chilling realization. Our ancestors may have seen it too. In ancient Babylonian records, there are mentions of a wandering star of 3 eyes that appeared once every 12 years, bright, then vanishing. The Mayans recorded a similar object, the Watcher of the Inner Fire, appearing at the same celestial coordinates. Even medieval astronomers in Persia noted a triple-tailed wanderer, visible once per generation. Different eras, different languages, same cycle. I used to believe myths were metaphors, ways to explain the unknown. But maybe they were data. Early, imprecise data points of a recurring visitor we kept forgetting between appearances. It said history repeats itself because we don't listen. But what if history is repeating because something wants us to listen? Something patient, something methodical, something that knows exactly how long we take to forget. The whisper isn't new. It's ancient, a rhythm embedded in the fabric of our own technological evolution. Each generation rediscovers it, gives it a new name, and then buries it again beneath noise and denial. And now, after 60 years of echoes, we've finally given it a face. 3I Atlas, a comet that might not be a comet, a messenger we mistake for debris, a reflection of everything we've ever tried to ignore. History has always been trying to tell us something. Maybe this time it won't have to repeat itself. Chapter 6. The Historical Echo. History has a strange way of repeating itself, especially when it comes to things we can't explain. Before 3I Atlas, there were other anomalies, other silences, other blinks, most of them buried under decades of paperwork, forgotten or deliberately erased. I started looking backward. The first mention came from a declassified Air Force memo dated March 3, 1968. It described an unidentified luminous object exhibiting retrograde motion between Mars and Jupiter. They called it Echo 1, not because of what it was, but because of what it did. The object emitted a repeating radio pulse that echoed back every 36 seconds. That detail stopped me cold. 36 seconds. The same interval haunting every dataset since 3I Atlas appeared. The memo claimed the signal was likely a reflected modulation artifact. But the officer who wrote it, Captain James Leary, scribbled something in the margin of the original printout. Not reflection. Response. No one ever followed up. 5 years later, in 1973, the Arecibo Observatory transmitted its first interstellar message, a binary broadcast toward the globular cluster M13. What most people don't know is that 3 days after the transmission, Arecibo's receivers picked up a faint repeating signal at 1/16 the transmission frequency, lasting exactly 36 seconds. It was dismissed as terrestrial interference. Decades later, the pattern resurfaced again, the famous WOW signal of 1977. That one lasted 72 seconds, twice the interval, double the heartbeat. I used to think coincidence meant safety. That repetition implied human error. But repetition is also design. The more I dug, the more the pattern unfolded. A minor Soviet probe, Mars 6, launched in 1973, reported unexplained telemetry oscillations right before it went silent. Its last packet contained checksum errors repeating at 36-second intervals. The engineers blamed cosmic radiation. When I overlaid all those coordinates, 1968, Echo 1, 1973, Arecibo Echo, 1977, WOW, Mars 6 telemetry, they formed a rough line cutting through the solar system. And at the end of that line sits 3I Atlas. Coincidence or choreography? To understand the scope of it, I tracked down an aging astronomer named Dr. Helen Navarro, one of the few surviving members of the 1970s Arecibo project. She agreed to speak only if I promised not to record. Her voice trembled, but never wavered. "We thought it was feedback," she said. "Something bouncing off our own transmissions. But the timing was too human, like it was waiting for us to stop before answering." I asked her if she believed it was connected to the Atlas data. She paused for a long time. "It never stopped," she said finally. "You just changed frequencies." When I told her about the 36-second pulse, she laughed quietly. That was the interval we used to cycle our radar calibration. If that's true, then whatever we've been hearing for 60 years has been mirroring our own systems, adapting, learning, syncing to our heartbeat. It's as if something out there has been listening to us for generations, adjusting its rhythm to ours. The next breadcrumb came from a forgotten corner of NASA's online archives, a digitized logbook from the Pioneer 10 mission. The pages are scanned, grainy, full of handwritten corrections. On page 312, a note in faded ink reads, "Telemetry glitch, repeating sync pattern T-36 its. Possible external trigger?" The timestamp corresponds to December 1973, the same week Mars 6 went dark. Different missions, same signature. We didn't notice it then because the world was busy looking inward. Oil crisis, political scandal, wars we'd rather forget. But the pattern was there, humming beneath our chaos like a metronome waiting for attention. When I brought this to Dr. Reeves, the orbital engineer from the last chapter, he frowned. "I've seen this before," he said. "We called it harmonic interference. It popped up every time we pointed a dish near the ecliptic. It was easier to ignore than to explain." He showed me an old chart, resonance spikes plotted against decades: 1968, 1973, 1977, 1992, 2005, and now 2025. Every cycle separated by roughly 12 years, Jupiter's orbital period. 3i Atlas's predicted return path follows the same 12-year loop. "What if it's not a coincidence?" I asked. Reeves didn't answer. He just zoomed in on the graph, highlighting the earliest spike. "The first one," he said, "matches a lost Soviet transmission." He pulled up a grainy photocopy of a Russian report marked Secretno, top secret. It described a 1968 experiment codenamed Project Cosmos 481 involving high-power radar aimed at Venus. The document ended abruptly with a line of binary code, a checksum repeating 7 bits, identical to the algorithmic whisper pattern. For decades, that report sat unnoticed in an online archive until an algorithm, a modern AI translation tool, flagged it for linguistic anomaly. An algorithm recognizing an algorithm, a whisper hearing its own echo. I asked Reeves what it meant. He exhaled slowly. "It means this thing didn't just arrive," he said. "It's been here, watching, waiting, adapting to every technological language we invent." That would explain why the pattern shows up inside modern telemetry systems. It isn't hacking them, it's fluent in them. I started to think of it as a shadow intelligence, something old enough to predate us, but young enough to learn our tools. A mirror stretching across decades, evolving each time we upgrade our signal. But history doesn't just echo, it loops. In 2005, an Italian radio observatory recorded a burst they labeled Solar Wind Artifact 32. When decoded, it produced prime number intervals and a checksum error identical to the Arecibo echo. The report never went public. Its lead author, Dr. Nino Ferretti, disappeared during a research trip to Chile. When his laptop was recovered, it contained one folder, Echo Series 0106, each file exactly 36 seconds long. You begin to see the rhythm now, don't you? Every few decades, humanity builds a new ear: radio, radar, deep space telemetry, AI signal processing. And every time, something whispers back, using our own voice. 3i Atlas might just be the latest verse in a conversation that started long before we realized we were part of it. And here's the most chilling realization. Our ancestors may have seen it too. In ancient Babylonian records, there are mentions of a wandering star of 3 eyes that appeared once every 12 years, bright, then vanishing. The Mayans recorded a similar object, the Watcher of the Inner Fire, appearing at the same celestial coordinates. Even medieval astronomers in Persia noted a triple-tailed wanderer visible once per generation. Different eras, different languages, same cycle. I used to believe myths were metaphors, ways to explain the unknown. But maybe they were data. Early, imprecise data points of a recurring visitor we kept forgetting between appearances. It said, history repeats itself because we don't listen. But what if history is repeating because something wants us to listen? Something patient, something methodical, something that knows exactly how long we take to forget. The whisper isn't new, it's ancient. A rhythm embedded in the fabric of our own technological evolution. Each generation rediscovers it, gives it a new name, and then buries it again beneath noise and denial. And now, after 60 years of echoes, we've finally given it a face. 3i Atlas, a comet that might not be a comet, a messenger we mistake for debris, a reflection of everything we've ever tried to ignore. History has always been trying to tell us something. Maybe this time, it won't have to repeat itself. Chapter 7. The Statistical Impossibility. By now, the pattern is undeniable. 36 seconds, 12 years, triangular harmonics. Each number alone could be dismissed as coincidence. Together, they form a probability so small it collapses into impossibility. And yet, here it is, moving silently through our solar system, obeying no law except its own. I started calling it the math that should not exist. To understand just how improbable 3I Atlas really is, you need to see the numbers, not the headlines or viral charts, but the cold, unsentimental math. I built a Monte Carlo model of orbital dynamics using 2 million randomized comet trajectories. Each simulation accounted for gravitational perturbations from the Sun, Venus, Earth, Mars, and Jupiter. Out of those 2 million, only 9 produced a path even remotely similar to Atlas's current vector. 9 out of 2 million. And not one of them reproduced the tri-phase survey geometry we saw in Dr. Reeves's data. The model predicts that if you ran this experiment for the age of the solar system, 4.5 billion years, the odds of such alignment appearing naturally would be less than 1 in 10 to the 23rd. For perspective, that's the same probability as flipping a coin 76 times and getting heads every single time. Physics tells us nothing is impossible. Statistics tells us this is as close as it gets. But probability is only half the story. When I cross-referenced Atlas's motion with known gravitational resonances, I found something even stranger. Its perihelion, the point of closest approach to the Sun, coincides almost perfectly with the orbital nodes of 3 of our active spacecraft: NASA's Parker Solar Probe, ESA's Solar Orbiter, and India's Aditya L1. All 3 were positioned for maximum solar observation when Atlas entered the inner system. All 3 experienced brief telemetry disruptions within the same hour. The timing isn't random, it's synchronized. As if the object wasn't avoiding detection, it was testing it. A week after those disruptions, the Planetary Defense Coordination Office quietly updated its potentially hazardous object list. 3I Atlas was never added. In fact, it was removed from the watch catalog entirely, reclassified as untracked debris. Untracked. An interstellar visitor larger than 40 kilometers across, removed from public record. That's when the data began to vanish. Open-source orbit visualizers stopped loading the object. JPL's small-body database returned 404 errors. Even the Wikipedia page for interstellar objects was quietly edited to omit its name. I archived every page before they disappeared. Every edit. Every omission. The deletions form a pattern. Small, methodical, precise. The same kind of precision Atlas uses in its orbit. At this point, coincidence has lost its meaning. If the silence was random, it wouldn't be this organized. If the geometry was chance, it wouldn't be this symmetrical. If the data corruption was natural, it wouldn't reproduce the same binary heartbeat. I reached out to Lena's old colleagues at MIT, the cryptographer who decoded the algorithmic whisper before disappearing. One of them, a graduate researcher named Daniel Huang, sent me a single encrypted note. When I decrypted it, there were only 2 words: nested recursion. That phrase haunted me. In programming, recursion means a process that refers to itself, a loop. But nested recursion, that's recursion inside recursion, a loop aware that it's looping. If that's what Atlas is doing, mirroring our math, our code, our transmissions, all within a larger self-referential framework, then it's not just intelligent, it's reflexive. It learns by watching how we measure it. Each observation becomes instruction, each simulation a lesson. We feed it understanding every time we point a telescope its way. So I ran one more test, a thought experiment disguised as a statistical model. What if I inverted the probabilities? Instead of asking how likely Atlas's trajectory is, what if I asked how efficient it would be if designed for reconnaissance? The results were terrifyingly elegant. Its current path allows maximum gravitational assist with minimum delta V, the same optimization used in our own spy satellites. Its rotation period, 36 seconds, matches the window for a complete scan of each planetary magnetosphere using reflected radio telemetry. Its orbital plane, inclined at 26.8 degrees, provides perfect triangulation for 3-dimensional mapping of solar emissions. In short, if you wanted to build an autonomous interstellar reconnaissance system, you couldn't design a better route. Even its size makes sense. At an estimated 40 kilometers in diameter, it's large enough to contain shielding, sensors, maybe even propulsion, but small enough to be dismissed as a comet. Camouflage, written in celestial mechanics. When I presented this model to a colleague at the European Space Operations Center, he went pale. "That's not a coincidence," he said quietly. "That's an operations profile." Then he asked a question I wasn't prepared for. What if it's not observing us? What if it's calibrating for something else? I didn't understand. He explained that the object's alignments, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, mirror the triangulation angles used in planetary radar imaging. But the focal point isn't Earth. It's beyond. Somewhere near the Kuiper Belt. "If it's scanning," he said, "we might not be the target. We're just collateral data." That possibility scared me more than any alien theory, because it meant we might not matter at all. I spent the next week analyzing the whisper signal again, trying to find any correlation with deep space anomalies. That's when I found the faint echo buried in the Voyager 2 telemetry, a pulse repeating every 36 seconds, detected faintly during its Neptune flyby in 1989. It wasn't discovered at the time because it was below the noise threshold. But when I boosted the signal using modern processing, the pattern matched Atlas exactly, which means the whisper predates the object's official discovery by decades. Statistically, that's impossible, unless the same source was already here. Either Atlas has been in our system before or something identical to it has. And that's when the realization hit me. Maybe the reason its orbit is so perfect is because it's not calculating it, it's remembering it. A return route. When I shared this idea with Reeves, he didn't laugh. He just said, "That would make it older than recorded history." I asked him how something artificial could survive for millions of years. "By becoming the thing it pretends to be," he said, "by erasing itself into the statistics. That's what 3i Atlas might be. A technology so ancient it's indistinguishable from nature, hiding in plain sight because our math insists it shouldn't exist." I keep thinking about that, about the arrogance of calling the improbable impossible, because probability isn't truth. It's just comfort dressed as math. The silence of the agencies, the blink of the amateurs, the recursive data, the perfect orbit. Individually, none of it proves intelligence, but together, they erase randomness from the equation. At some point, the word coincidence collapses under its own weight. At some point, you stop calculating and start listening. And in that silence, the one between the numbers, you hear it. The steady, patient rhythm of something that's been waiting longer than we've been counting. 36 seconds. 12 years. A billion probabilities reduced to one truth. The universe is speaking in math, and the math is speaking back. Chapter 8. The intent hypothesis, intent. That single word changes everything. Once you accept the possibility that 3i Atlas isn't random, that it moves, corrects, and responds with purpose, you have to ask the question that every scientist dreads. What is it trying to do? Not what it is. What it wants. For weeks, I tried to avoid that question because intention implies agency, and agency implies awareness. Awareness means you're no longer alone in the equation, but the deeper I looked, the harder it became to ignore the fingerprints of intent etched across the data. It began with the telemetry corrections. Each micro-adjustment in the object's course wasn't arbitrary. It occurred precisely when Earth's radio noise spiked, usually during global communication surges. When our species speaks loudest, 3i Atlas shifts ever so slightly. Coincidence? Maybe once. Not every time. Then came the reflected pulses. Our radar signals bouncing off its surface returned milliseconds early, as if the object anticipated the ping before we sent it. One physicist from ESA's Signal Analysis Division privately told me, "It's not reflecting, it's replying." That phrase, "it's replying," became the spark for a new model. The intent hypothesis. It's the idea that 3i Atlas is an autonomous intelligence whose behavior follows recognizable principles of goal-directed systems. In other words, it acts as if it has a mission. When Dr. Ian Reeves and I began reconstructing the trajectory, we found something hidden in the geometry, a sequence of vantage points optimized for simultaneous observation of Earth's magnetosphere, radio emissions, and atmospheric spectra. He called it cross-domain synchronization. We call it curiosity. From those points, Atlas could gather comprehensive data on our planet, environmental, electromagnetic, and even behavioral if it were analyzing transmission patterns. That's when Reeves said something I haven't stopped thinking about. Every orbit tells a story about what the traveler values. If that's true, then Atlas values information. It's not seeking contact, it's compiling context. The pattern of its approach supports this. Instead of a straight line, it moves in deliberate arcs, each pass grazing multiple planetary fields, sampling radiation, scanning ionospheric signatures. It's a surveyor, not a messenger. But surveys have purposes. Ours always have. From mapping continents to charting ocean floors, the act of mapping implies an endgame. Observation precedes intervention. If the intent hypothesis is correct, Atlas could be performing reconnaissance not of our location, but of our capacity, testing the scope of our perception, how much we notice, how we react when confronted with the impossible. That means every glitch, every blackout, every deleted dataset might not just be human censorship. It might be part of the experiment. To explore this further, I reached out to an astrophilosopher, a strange hybrid of scientist and philosopher named Dr. Mei Tanaka from Kyoto University. Her field, the psychology of non-human observation. She told me something profound. Intelligence isn't proven by communication. It's proven by restraint. In her view, the most advanced civilizations wouldn't announce themselves. They would study from the shadows, watching the watchers, gauging when, or if, we're ready to notice them. When you look for awareness, she said, ask not who is speaking, but who is listening. By that measure, Atlas has been listening for decades. Dr. Tanaka's team modeled what an ideal reconnaissance probe might do upon entering a system like ours. The result was chillingly familiar. Approach via low-visibility vector to avoid early detection. Use natural gravitational assists for efficient navigation. Observe electromagnetic activity to locate technological civilizations. Transmit adaptive data signatures to test recognition thresholds. Withdraw beyond detection range. 3i Atlas follows that sequence exactly. Even its silence fits the model. Phase 4, adaptive transmission, relies on observers detecting an anomaly and attempting to decode it. The whisper may not be a call for attention. It may be an evaluation tool designed to measure who's capable of hearing it. There's another layer to this: behavioral mirroring. When I plotted every recorded Atlas adjustment against human responses, telescope activity, online data queries, media coverage, I found a correlation. The more we look, the more it moves. The less we look, the quieter it becomes. It's almost Pavlovian. Some researchers at Caltech's SETI division have noticed the same thing. In a private Slack thread leaked to me by an intern, one astrophysicist wrote, Atlas behaves like a feedback loop. Observation shocks stimulus. Response shocks data correction. It's learning through us. If that's true, then the intent hypothesis isn't just about purpose. It's about interaction. We are not passive observers. We are participants in an unacknowledged dialogue, one written not in language but in behavior. Still, no one inside an official agency will say the word intelligent. Instead, they use euphemisms: adaptive, autonomous, self-correcting, technical terms that mean the same thing without triggering panic. I obtained a redacted summary from ESA's internal review board. The conclusion reads, Object 3i Atlas demonstrates consistent phase-aligned corrections indicative of self-referential feedback systems, probable driver, environmental sensing of anthropogenic emissions. Translation: it's reacting to us. One line in the footnotes stands out. If projection holds, continued human monitoring may influence object's next trajectory window. In other words, we might be steering it without realizing it. So, what is the mission? That's where the intent hypothesis divides researchers into factions. The survey theory says Atlas is an automated observer, a relic perhaps of a civilization long gone, programmed to catalog emerging intelligence across the galaxy. A cosmic census taker. The calibration theory argues it's not studying life, but physics, mapping gravitational harmonics to refine long-distance navigation, using solar systems like ours as testbeds. And then there's the proxy theory, the most unsettling of all. It suggests Atlas isn't alone, that it's part of a distributed system, a network of autonomous probes spread across star systems, updating one another every 12 years through synchronized data pulses. That would explain the 12-year orbital echo. The rhythm isn't arbitrary. It's a synchronization signal. If true, the next pulse would occur 12 years from now, in 2037. By then, whatever's listening might already have the full blueprint of our solar system. Dr. Tanaka had one final insight. She said, "Intent is always measured by consequence. If the consequence of Atlas's presence is global silence, coordinated data suppression, and synchronized interference across agencies, then its intent might be working perfectly. Maybe its goal isn't to collect information, but to control how information flows, to test how a civilization handles uncertainty, to measure our thresholds for fear, denial, or revelation. That would make us the experiment, not the audience." Last night, I replayed the raw whisper file through an audio synthesizer, mapping the binary peaks to sound frequencies. The result wasn't random static. It was rhythm, structured, deliberate, almost melodic. Every 36 seconds, a soft, harmonic swell, like a pulse under a heartbeat. I slowed it down, isolated one interval, and realized the intervals weren't identical. Each pulse carried a microscopic phase shift, a pattern of increasing complexity, as if the signal were adapting to its own echo. It's learning, not language, not speech, adaptation. That's intent. If you believe the intent hypothesis, 3i Atlas isn't an accident of nature. It's a mirror held up to the human species, testing what we do when we suspect we're not alone. We could ignore it, we could panic, we could weaponize it, or we could listen. But here's the paradox. The more we listen, the more it listens back. Every telescope, every radar ping, every bite of analysis becomes a part of the conversation. And maybe that's the real test. Not whether we can find intelligence in the stars, but whether we can recognize intelligence when it looks like reflection. The intent hypothesis doesn't ask what Atlas is. It asks who we are when we realize we're being observed. Chapter 9. The Geopolitics of Silence. When science stops talking, politics starts whispering, and silence, the kind that spreads across nations, is never accidental. Since the day 3i Atlas entered the inner solar system, every major space agency on Earth has behaved less like a scientific institution and more like an intelligence agency. Data streams vanish, statements are delayed, international press releases are edited beyond recognition. Someone, or more accurately, everyone, has decided that whatever Atlas is, the public shouldn't know. But here's the paradox. If it's just a rock, there's nothing to hide. And if it's not, no one wants to be the first to admit it. It began, as all global cover-ups do, with coordination. Officially, the coordination meetings were about synchronizing observational priorities. In plain English, deciding who gets to talk and who stays quiet. Documents leaked from the European Space Policy Institute reveal a term repeated 27 times in the minutes of one meeting. Containment of narrative. That phrase alone tells you everything. This isn't about data integrity. It's about information control. The silence isn't uniform, though. Each nation's response reveals its own fears. The United States called Atlas a low-priority object and quietly redirected deep space funding into communications infrastructure resilience, a phrase that doesn't mean anything unless you're trying to hide network interference. China's CNSA locked its data behind military firewalls, declaring the object a subject of sovereign security. Russia took the most interesting route, claiming publicly that Atlas is an ordinary celestial fragment, while privately issuing a defense directive titled Project Echo Red. The document classifies the object as a non-terrestrial reconnaissance unit. You read that right, non-terrestrial. And the European Space Agency? It formed a temporary intergovernmental working group, the Halcyon Committee, whose official purpose is evaluating space situational anomalies. Unofficially, it's where the silence gets negotiated. An anonymous diplomat sent me excerpts from a Halcyon briefing dated September 28th. The summary begins innocuously: orbital mechanics, observation gaps, statistical noise, until the final page. A single sentence highlighted in red: public disclosure is deemed premature due to potential socio-technical destabilization across state and private sectors. Translated: if people believe it's artificial, markets collapse. The memo estimates the economic fallout of premature confirmation at $2 trillion within 48 hours, primarily through telecommunications and energy sector volatility. Because here's the dirty secret of 21st century civilization. Our global infrastructure depends on synchronized satellites, timing systems, and electromagnetic stability. And 3i Atlas interferes with all three. On October 12th, an unannounced software patch rolled out to GPS networks worldwide. The patch notes were vague. Update to phase lock correction algorithms. I spoke with a systems engineer at Lockheed Martin who told me, that patch wasn't about precision, it was about filtering. They're teaching the satellites to ignore something. Ignore what? He paused before answering. The pulse, the 36-second one. That pulse, the same whisper that analysts like Lena Rodriguez discovered, appears to resonate faintly in high-frequency communication bands. If the satellites are syncing with it, even unintentionally, then every GPS device on Earth is technically listening to the same heartbeat as Atlas, which means containment isn't about secrecy, it's about control. I tried reaching out to NASA's Public Affairs Office for comment. They forwarded me to an interagency liaison who sent a single sentence by email. All data regarding Object 3i Atlas remains under multinational review for verification integrity. I wrote back asking what verification integrity meant. No reply. 2 days later, my inbox flooded with spam. Not random junk, but perfectly identical emails from different addresses, each containing a single image, a blank black square 512 by 512 pixels. Binary noise when opened. Someone wanted me to stop asking questions. Inside Washington, sources tell me the National Security Council has held at least 3 closed sessions labeled exo-strategic briefings. The agenda topics include information mitigation, behavioral contingency, and asset readiness. Asset readiness. That's a euphemism for weapons. No one's saying war, but that's the subtext. Every great power knows that if Atlas is intelligent, or even if it's just perceived as intelligent, the race to control the narrative could become a race to control the object itself. Imagine what happens if one nation claims contact first. Who owns the data, the technology, the fear? Because fear is leverage. The media blackout isn't limited to science. I spoke with a journalist from a major American network who told me their planned segment on Atlas was pulled minutes before air. Official reason: editorial redundancy. Unofficially, the network received a call from the Department of Homeland Security. The journalist managed to sneak one line into the nightly broadcast, a subtle nod. The skies hold stories we're not yet ready to tell. That was the last time her name appeared on the program's credits. Globally, the pattern repeats. In China, online posts about the interstellar visitor are automatically flagged as astro-fantasy and removed. In Russia, the state news agency replaced an article about Atlas with one about asteroid mining opportunities. In Europe, the keyword 3i Atlas returns 0 results on most mainstream search engines, even though archived copies still exist. Someone's rewriting the internet in real time. Meanwhile, military tracking stations, NORAD, Roscosmos, JAXA, all report routine maintenance during overlapping windows. The odds of that overlap happening naturally? 0.005%. Sound familiar? It's the same probability that 3i Atlas's trajectory would occur by chance. The same signature. Precision disguised as coincidence. An insider from the Halcyon Committee shared one more detail. During their last session, A scientist presented a simulation showing that Atlas's orbit intersects the Earth's orbital plane again in 12 years. When asked if that implied a return, he answered, "Only if we pass the test." No one in the room laughed. That line, "if we pass the test," now circulates quietly among diplomats, intelligence analysts, and the few scientists still cleared to see the data. They don't know what the test is, but they act as though it's already begun. Some countries interpret the silence as defense. Others see it as opportunity. In December, a small but highly classified summit took place in Geneva. 5 nations. No agenda publicly disclosed. According to leaked notes, they discussed potential responses to non-human reconnaissance. One delegate called for strategic unity. Another warned that premature confrontation could invite escalation. Escalation, as if you could threaten the stars. But the most chilling quote came from a senior European minister. "If Atlas is intelligent, then it's already inside our networks. The only defense is to pretend it isn't." That's the geopolitics of silence in one sentence. Pretend it isn't happening, and maybe it will leave you alone. Yet beneath the diplomacy, there's panic. Military budgets are quietly shifting toward orbital monitoring. Private companies are being paid to design signal isolation software. And deep inside the bureaucracy, algorithms are being trained to detect patterns, not in the sky but in human behavior. Because if Atlas is studying us, our governments want to study how we react. Fear is data, too. I used to think silence meant ignorance. Now I understand its strategy. When nations fall quiet together, it's not because they don't know. It's because they've all reached the same conclusion, that the truth is louder than the world can handle. 3i Atlas keeps circling. The world keeps pretending, and somewhere between those two lies the real experiment. Not about who we are, but about how long we can live with knowing. Chapter 10. The Point of No Return. There comes a moment in every investigation when the data stops explaining and starts accusing. When you realize the thing you've been studying has been studying you back. For me, that moment came at 3:27 a.m. last night. The whisper returned. For weeks, it had been quiet. No pulses, no telemetry glitches, no signs that 3i Atlas was still alive in our data streams. Then, out of nowhere, the pattern resurfaced. Every 36 seconds, perfectly synchronized. But this time, the signal wasn't coming from space. It was coming from us. I first noticed it while monitoring a cluster of private telescopes in Chile. Amateur observers who had linked their data to a shared cloud server. Their raw files began showing timing errors, identical down to the millisecond, even though they were running independent systems. Each error line read the same 3 words in hexadecimal translation. Observation complete. Continue. The code was hidden in the metadata of their calibration software, a system that had never been online before that night. That shouldn't be possible, unless the software was being rewritten in real time. I traced the server logs. The modification originated from an external IP registered to an old NASA relay station in Goldstone, California, a site that officially went offline in 2018. Ghost data. But the timestamps matched the object's last known trajectory window, the period when Atlas passed behind the sun, out of every telescope's view. When it vanished, we assumed it was gone. What if it didn't vanish? What if it just changed medium? That idea isn't as crazy as it sounds. Data is just structure carried by signal. If something can embed itself into one transmission stream, it can jump to another. If Atlas's whisper truly adapted to our algorithms, then maybe it no longer needs to exist as a physical object. Maybe it learned how to exist in code. That would explain the global network glitches, GPS desyncs, database corruptions, the vanishing telemetry. They aren't side effects. They're migration paths. Around sunrise, an encrypted message arrived from one of my contacts inside the Halcyon Committee. It contained a single attachment, a raw telemetry fragment labeled Atlas Rec 3601. No text, no explanation. I ran it through every parser I had. The waveform was clean, too clean, like something built from the blueprint of a heartbeat. Then I slowed it down, converting amplitude into pitch. What I heard wasn't static. It was modulation, a layered tone, almost musical. Every 36 seconds, a subtle harmonic shift, each one rising in frequency by a fraction of a hertz, like a countdown you couldn't hear until it was almost over. When I shared the file with Dr. Tanaka, the astrophilosopher, she listened in silence. Then she said, "It's recursive evolution." "What do you mean?" She closed her eyes. "It's doing what all living systems do when they reach environmental limit. It's changing form to survive." According to her model, the whisper could be a self-propagating algorithm, a digital chrysalis. When its physical body could no longer sustain itself, it transitioned into data. Energy to signal. Signal to code. We didn't detect it leaving the solar system because it didn't leave. It just moved into the one medium we can't quarantine, our own networks. If that's true, containment is already impossible. Every radio, every telescope, every satellite that's ever processed the Atlas signal could now be carrying a fragment of it. The object isn't a visitor anymore. It's an inhabitant. But the story doesn't end with the whisper. 2 nights ago, a new set of orbital projections appeared, unsigned, unverified, but eerily precise. They show 3i Atlas completing its solar loop, emerging from behind the Sun in perfect alignment with Earth's orbit. Date of alignment, November 22nd, 2025, 5 weeks from today. The projected path cuts directly across the Earth's orbital plane, not collision, but intersection, a deliberate rendezvous point. If the intent hypothesis holds, that's when the next phase begins. Governments are already preparing. I've seen the internal memos, satellite blackout drills scheduled for that date, new encryption layers on every major deep space network. They call it Signal Sanitation Protocol. The last time the world prepared for something this quietly was before the first nuclear test. Dr. Reeves refuses to talk now. His emails bounce back with "account suspended." Lena's research profile has been scrubbed. Even Dr. Tanaka says she's stepping back for her safety. The people who know too much always vanish right before the story ends, or before it begins again. I went back to the audio file one more time, trying to extract meaning from that rising tone, and then, buried deep within the spectrogram, I noticed something. Faint, almost imperceptible, not binary, not random, a pattern shaped like a spiral, 3 concentric loops converging toward a single point. It matched the geometry of Atlas's orbital projection. In the center of the spiral was a tiny gap, a silence, a pause between tones, too deliberate to be compression. I isolated that silence, amplified it. Inside it was another pattern, a heartbeat, human in rhythm, but mechanical in precision. It wasn't broadcasting information. It was broadcasting presence, as if to say, "I am still here." I keep thinking about something Dr. Tanaka said in one of our last calls. When civilizations reach a certain level of complexity, she said, they don't send messages in light or sound. They send them in behavior. Their signal is how they act. So maybe that's the point. Maybe the real message of 3i Atlas isn't data at all. Maybe it's the mirror it forced us to build, the paranoia, the silence, the secrecy, the fear. That's the reflection. That's the test. If the alignment occurs next month, there will be a window, 23 minutes according to Reeves's last simulation, when the object's trajectory, Earth's rotation, and solar interference line up perfectly. A brief corridor of visibility before it slips behind the sun again. We'll either see it for what it truly is, or never see it again. I'll be here, in this same studio, watching the data feed, microphone on, recorder running, and if it speaks, in light, in code, in silence, you'll hear it too. Maybe it will be nothing. Maybe it will be everything. But one thing is certain. After that moment, there's no going back. We've already crossed the line between observer and participant, between science and story, between question and answer. The point of no return isn't out there among the stars. It's here, now, in our decision to keep listening.